I think from the earliest time I can recall, I had in my mind that I would go into the newspaper business. When I was, I guess the first job I had was when I was 14. I worked during the summers on the Fresno Bee, and I did that for a couple of summers, and then I started coming up to Sacramento to work on the paper here during summers, and I worked during college, and I guess the truth is I never really thought of doing anything else. I went to work for the Washington Post after I got out of the Army. I was there about 3.5, 4 years, and found it was a period that really was very important to me as far as my education about newspapering. It was a good learning experience, and I think I got a lot out of it. One of the most exciting things in my life really was the chance to go to work for Adlai Stevenson during the 1956 campaign. I was on the Washington Post at the time, and I had an interest in Stevenson, admired him very much. I'd never met him, and I applied for whatever job might be available, and eventually went to work in December of 1955 in Chicago as assistant press secretary. The name for the Bee has, I think, a very simple origin. At least I've always been told that my great-grandfather James picked the name because the bee was a sign of industriousness, busy as a bee, and it meant that the people who worked on the paper were going to be industrious, and it was going to be a newspaper that also would have a sting. It's difficult to describe the role of the Bee. I think there are many different roles. The most important role is informing the public what's going on. If we do that well, the rest of our roles fall in place pretty well. I think to inform the public, we have to be fairly aggressive. I think it's more than just reporting the news on the surface. I think it's being willing to dig and report some things that people don't want to have reported. One of the opportunities, I should say, that the newspaper has is to share with the readers some judgments that we might have about politicians, those who are doing a good job and who are not doing a good job. We don't expect the readers to embrace our endorsements necessarily, but we do have the advantage, being a newspaper, of having a lot of reporters talk to a lot of people and being able to collect a lot of information about politicians that voters by themselves cannot do. Essentially, the Bee editorial positions today follow from the Bee positions of earlier days. We are very much for the right of the individual to make as full a free choice as possible. We believe that restricting people's speech or restricting people's ability to travel or people's ability to enter commerce is not good, and government should not set up a lot of rules and regulations on individual freedom. We feel that on social issues, we have always felt that the government does have a responsibility to help those who need help, who are in need of some assistance, whether it's medical assistance or simply financial assistance because they're indigent. One of the social issues that's become very prominent in the last few years, of course, is the question of abortion, pro and con. We have always felt that women should have the right to decide what is done with their body, and they should have a choice of having abortions or not having abortions without any direction or control from government. I'd say in general the The newspaper has continued to support the right of labor to organize. We supported the farm workers when they were organizing. We did part company with the United Farm Workers when they got into the use of secondary boycotts. But generally, I would say that our position has continued to be the same as it has historically in the past. The fight to protect natural resources goes back to the very earliest days of the bee. It really goes back to my grandfather, who was trying to protect the land from the onslaught of the gold miners, the dredging, and the hydro miners who were wreaking havoc to the soil and the farmers. We have opposed the uncontrolled lumbering in the redwood areas where the government has had control but has leased them out to private operators. We have opposed the uncontrolled licensing and leasing of public land for any development, whether it's oil or whether it's digging for minerals, without due consideration of the harm that it's going to do to the community and to the future. I would say that the bee is in the liberal to moderate spectrum, but that's a judgment that I would make that I think a lot of people would disagree with. Some people, particularly here in Sacramento, think that we're very far to the left and refer to us as the Sacramento Pravda. I think it's a distinct advantage for the community and for the paper to have our company in private hands, not be owned by a publicly owned company. There is, I think, total agreement about the importance of keeping the newspapers independent and privately owned. There isn't any conflict about the goals in the basic sense of what is important to the members of the family who own the company. It is important that we preserve the independence of the paper and its integrity. And there has never been any effort or thought from any of the members of the family to change that. Going public would, I think, put that in hazard, and so I feel that that is not something that any of the members of our family would think of doing. I think it's a fact that more and more independent newspapers have been bought by chains. That's unfortunately the reality. I have a feeling that that trend is going to continue. It doesn't seem to ever work in the reverse. Once a newspaper becomes a part of a chain, it almost never ceases to be part of the chain. So the situation will become more extreme as time goes on. I don't think it's a healthy development. I think that in most situations, and there are always exceptions, in most situations I think it's best for the community if the newspaper is as local as possible. There is a tendency of chains to worry about their earnings, particularly if they're a public company. And when newspapers worry about their earnings, they have to do everything on the short term rather than the long run. For example, we never would have, if we had been a publicly owned company, we never would have thought of going up and doing what we did in Anchorage, where we bought a failing newspaper and got into a struggle that we knew would take 5-10 years, and we would have to lose money for that period. No publicly owned chain would think of